Hi, I'm Cindy, and I am here today with Dr. Jacqueline Sperling. And as I say, I'm always excited about these, and I'm always excited about our guests. And I know I say that every time, but that's because there's so many important issues that we're touching on now. And Dr. Sperling is a director of training and research at the McLean Anxiety Mastery Program. And I know we're focusing a lot on mental health, and it's really important during this time. And this program, we're going to focus a lot more on children. So first, Dr. Sperling, Jacqueline, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and a
So
privilege.
thanks. Let's talk about kids, what they face now, the uncertainty, the upcoming school year. How can we help them understand what's going on?
That's a great question. And I think general principles for children can apply for these unprecedented times with children, giving them just enough information so that they understand and not too much where you're giving them salacious details that may scare them, but give them just enough so that they understand and so that their imaginations don't generate unhelpful or inaccurate conclusions. And so sitting them down, having direct conversations with them, because sometimes if they're overhearing things, they may start to make assumptions or jump to conclusions. Sitting them down, having a conversation with them and explaining to them what to expect. And one of the things I think to expect is to prepare to be flexible. There's a lot that is unknown right now, and I think a message that we can communicate to children to say plans may change at school under the goal or within the goal of trying to keep children safe and meet their learning needs at the same time. So that would be the rationale behind any plans changing for schools. I do think it might be important for families or suggestion to prepare for, we can't prepare for everything, but it seems that schools are looking at 3 different possible plans, such as in-school full-time, full-time remote learning, or a hybrid of the two. And I suggest to families to develop a plan for each of the 3 of what it might look like for their families, including what childcare may look like, transportation to and from school, what it may look like when their kids are at home, and how to structure those days and monitor the remote learning. And to parents and caregivers can discuss among each other first and then explain these plans to the children, and then so that if parents need to change plans because the schools have changed things in the middle of the year, that children are prepared and they know what each plan may look like. They're like, oh, okay, that's plan number 2. We know what that looks like. We talked about that. And so I think to give them a heads up and think about all the details ahead of time. Granted, again, just to reiterate, we can't predict everything in the future, but as much as we can create some predictability, routine, consistency, I think that'll be helpful for children.
Yeah, well, that's all good advice. And I know with the routine and knowing what's going to come up is very helpful. So how can, like, kids haven't had the socialization, it's probably, this is more specific, well, to all ages, the socialization that since March of hanging with friends, and maybe they've only been able to hang with 1 or 2. And how do you fill that void, or what can we do when they miss that interaction, and maybe feel that something they've done, or how do they how do you get them back and keep that socialization going?
It's really tough. I think it's first important not to do it just once, but continue to do this throughout this experience, is to validate or acknowledge how children may be feeling about this. There are a lot of losses for everyone involved, and maybe a lot of loss about not only missing out and spending time with their friends on one-on-one or small group play days, but also birthday parties and extracurricular activities that they may have. Um, and so to really acknowledge that for them, and at the same time, how can we make the most of the situation? Granted that we're in this situation, we can't change that aspect. How can we make the most of it? If families have access to technology, I might suggest perhaps setting up regular virtual play dates for kids. So if they have, a variety of different friends, maybe Friday night, it's, plans with this friend, Saturday it's with this friend, Sunday with this friend, and also scheduling regular FaceTime or virtual dates with family members so that kids can remain as connected as possible. Granted, it's not the same. I appreciate us having in-person play dates. I think the more that we can create some, again, consistency, routine, and help children feel as connected as possible, these are ways to make the most of challenging times.
Yeah, and I know with the sports now, and as you mentioned, the extracurricular activities, that's difficult because it almost seems like there's no outlet for, your anxiety. I guess you gotta get some outside time and run around or hike or do something to kind of get rid of that energy that, because as you said, it is like a loss, and I think a lot of people are in the anger stage, and you know,
Yeah, same point.
really have been going through the stages of loss when you think about it like that. Ugh. So, what can, healthy boundaries, we're all at home, you got the kids, you may be working from home, or you may be, everything is all mixed up. How do you keep your boundaries and your time and everything together?
That's a good question. I think it takes a lot of extra preparations and thoughtful work to make this happen because it can be so easy to slip into habits of just having blurred lines among work, school, and life boundaries. And granted, just also acknowledging these are really tough times and people, some families are being particularly confined spaces. So trying to make the most of what you have. What I might suggest is families delineating start and end times to create some boundaries of when people might be online and offline for school or work, and then to shut things down and maybe perhaps everyone has their own space or corner where that's where they're during the work and school day and that's where they're operating to have some separate spaces. And families can come together for meals and maybe a family activity after dinner, whether it's a game or things like that. But to have everybody their separate spaces because it is atypical for families to spend that much time together. We do encourage family time when it's all the time. People really do benefit from a balance there of their own individual time, their peer time, and their family time. Um, I think on weekends in particular, when, and if there were time in the afternoons after school, families to plan some downtime and some me time. We can call it quiet time, their terminology for that, where everybody goes to a separate space and does something quiet, like doesn't have non-screen time related to decompress and have their own time there. And I think even though for partners in the household to have their own separate space and everyone go to time to do that.
What are there like signs that you could maybe notice in children that, they're not adapting well, or that, there's some signs of stress or anxiety developing in them that you can intercept before it escalates?
Um, that's a really good question too. All great questions. I would say having regular and frequent open conversations with children, creating space to hear how they're feeling, how things are going. It doesn't have to be every hour, but it could be when you guys are checking in at dinner or maybe like once a week or every couple of days, seeing how things are going. And that may give you sort of like a feelings thermometer check times where are they on that feelings thermometer at that moment. If you start to feel like things are ratcheting up, that might be a time where it might be helpful for them to get some extra support with a mental health provider. Other things out for which to look might be regressing. So for children to start to act younger than their biological age, if you might start to see some disruptive behavior, maybe you have a child who tends to be pretty compliant, but then they start defying you and in ways that you wouldn't ordinarily expect to be developmentally appropriate. And I would say also avoidance behaviors, if they start to avoid pandemic approved activities that they are allowed to do, and they start to withdraw, seem extra down, hopeless, those would be times, things that would warrant some extra attention and support most likely.
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult it is for kids, with everything just being changed up so much. I know here in Barnstable they're doing the hybrid system, and then we have a lot of special needs kids that come in the library here, and I know how routine and non-flexible they are, that having to be flexible in this time is very, very difficult. Do you have any, and I know I didn't ask you this ahead of time, but do you have any, with autistic or special needs, how, any magical tricks or tips, or is it, I mean, I had people banging on the door here at the library to get materials because one of their child was all out of reading materials, and he was blind and had challenges and stuff. And I know there's a lot of anxiety with special needs kids. Is there any wisdom you have?
Oh man, I wish I had some magical tricks there to help everyone involved. And one, I just want to acknowledge it, and these are trying times for everyone involved, and particularly for families who have children with additional needs, and particularly where having predictability and consistency and routine are really, really helpful and grounding for these kids. And the pandemic goes against the grain of all of those. I think, and that's where I think some of these ideas of planning as much as you can ahead, creating as much routine consistency within your days, within the pandemic's constraints, I think can be helpful. Having a calendar that is visible for the whole family, like up in the kitchen, and for children who are not of reading age, you can use visual cues, like for like a schoolhouse for the day that they're going to the physical school, and maybe a computer for a day for online school, but that they know where and when they're going to be, and then it's a visual cue and reminders, and that they can plan ahead and look ahead, and you can review the calendar each night after dinner. You can review the whole week, perhaps on Sundays after dinner, and so that these kids have some predictability, some routine that for which they can look forward to ground them.
Well, good. This is all good advice, and I appreciate it. Are there any last things that you would like people to know with, mental health in this time for either the parents or the children during?
No, but I did have one additional thought just thinking about for kids, particularly on the spectrum, if they were doing remote learning school, it might be particularly helpful for them to have headphones so there's external stimuli that's distracting for them. And I feel like loud noises can also be disruptive for them and challenging. But in terms of in general, um, I would say there's a skill that I find really helpful, not only as a clinician, but for the families with whom I work, radical acceptance. And I think this is something that may come in handy, particularly now in this trying time, is that for families really to acknowledge the pain that is outside of our control. No one asked for this, no one decided for this to happen, no one chose it. um, and at the same time to make the most of what is within our control and to approach it with open and willing hands. And it seems quite basic. It really is a radical concept to resist the urge to fight and say, why me? Or I don't want to do this, or this is too hard. And then only exacerbates or worsens the suffering. So for families to validate not only their children's experiences, and then as much as they can approach what is within their control and make the most of it with open and willing hands. And to know that they're certainly not alone, and to connect with others as much as possible in a safe way, whether it's virtually, to get the support that they deserve. This is a really tough time, and we are all in it together.
Yeah, I know that's probably a good thing. So if somebody decided they need help, would their best first step be to contact their primary care physician?
I think that's a great first line, to see if they have any referral options or what the pediatrician might think might be helpful. Um,
Okay. Well, I thank you so much for taking the time with talking with us today, and it's all great advice, and I know our patrons and our people will be very interested in hearing your thoughts on all this. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having me. It's a privilege and pleasure also to meet you virtually, and I hope you and all listeners stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.